Wyoming Territory, July 1883. Isaiah Trent spotted the child long before he reached the fence. Just a scrap of a boy, no older than 5, standing barefoot in the dust beside the north post line, his small hands gripping the top wire like he was holding onto the edge of the world. Isaiah reined in his buckskin mare, heart knocking once, hard. The boy looked up with wide, sunburnt cheeks, lips cracked, hair tangled and bleached pale by the sun. "Hey there, kid," Isaiah said gently, dismounting. "You lost." The boy blinked, then jerked his head toward the trees behind the fence line. Isaiah followed the direction and froze. A woman was stumbling out of the brush, her dress torn at the hem, a ripped shawl hanging limp from her shoulders. Blood dried on one side of her face. Her dark blonde hair was matted and clung to her cheeks. Some of it stuck to a scratch that ran from her forehead down to her jaw. Her boots were caked in mud, and she limped like something inside her had given way a long time ago. She looked like she had walked through hell. Isaiah stepped forward, instinct making his voice firm. "Madam, are you hurt?" She stopped, swaying slightly, her eyes flicking from him to the boy. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The boy tugged at Isaiah's sleeve. "Her name's Kamara. She's my mama." Kamara. She blinked hard, steadying herself with the low branch of a cottonwood. Isaiah looked back at her. "I'm Isaiah Trent. This here's my land. You're safe now. Can I help you?" Kamara nodded once, then crumpled to her knees. Isaiah was beside her before she hit the ground. She came to in the cool dark of his cabin, lying on his cot with a wet cloth on her head. The boy sat beside her, clutching her fingers like they were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Isaiah stood by the stove, stirring something that smelled like beans and coffee. When he looked over and saw her eyes open, he set the spoon down and crossed to her. "You passed out. Been 2 hours. Your boy," he glanced at the child who had fallen asleep curled against her. "He said your name's Kamara Harlan. That right?" She nodded slowly. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Yes. Can you tell me what happened?" Kamara swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "We were with a wagon train heading west. My husband died last winter, and I thought Oregon might be a better start." Her hands tightened on the blanket. "But we got hit south of Cheyenne. Bandits took everything. I grabbed my son and ran. The rest." Her jaw clenched. She did not finish. Isaiah sat down on the edge of the cot, careful not to wake the boy. "How long have you been walking?" "3 days, maybe more. I lost track." Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast, refusing to let them fall. "I just kept walking north. Figured someone would find us before we dropped." "You made it." Kamara looked at him, really looked at him now. He was rough around the edges, with a scar on his jaw and a quiet steadiness in his brown eyes that made her feel like she could breathe again. "Why are you being kind?" she asked. Isaiah shrugged. "Because you need someone to be." The boy's name was Nolan. He had Kamara's eyes and her stubborn streak, too. The next morning he was up and poking around the barn, asking Isaiah 100 questions about horses and hay, and why the rooster made so much noise. Isaiah showed him how to scatter corn for the hens and how to check for eggs. When Kamara limped out of the cabin, wrapped in one of Isaiah's flannel shirts, she found Nolan sitting on the fence rail, listening like Isaiah was telling ghost stories instead of explaining how to mend a broken stirrup. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Isaiah caught her watching. "He is a good boy," he said. "I kept him alive," she said quietly, as if that was all she had left to show for her life. Isaiah came closer, voice low. "That is more than most could have done. You did not give up." Kamara looked at him, and something deep inside her stirred. She had not met many men like him. None, really. Her husband had been weak in quiet ways, easily swayed, easily angry. Isaiah was steady, calm, The kind of man who would carry a stranger through his front door and ask nothing in return. That night, Nolan fell asleep with one of the barn cats curled against his chest. Kamara sat on the porch steps, knees hugged to her chest. Isaiah brought her coffee and they drank in silence, watching the stars. "You planning to keep moving west?" he asked. "I do not know any more," she said. "I do not know where I belong. You are here now." She looked at him. "Do you want us here?" Isaiah met her eyes, his voice quiet. "I am not the kind of man who says things unless he means them, and I want you safe. Both of you." Kamara stared down at her mug, then reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had touched someone without fear in almost a year. By the end of the fourth day, Nolan had taken to following Isaiah with the quiet loyalty of a hound pup. He didn't speak much that morning, not because he was tired, but because he was thinking, his little brow furrowed like he was solving something big. Isaiah let him be. There was no rush out here. A boy could take his time figuring the shape of his world. Kamara had spent the better part of the morning outside, straightening the porch rail with a borrowed hammer and a dozen bent nails. Her limp was worse today, though she said nothing about it. Isaiah noticed her jaw clench every time she shifted her weight. He didn't press her. She wouldn't answer. Instead, after tending the horses, he brought her an old cane from the lean-to, carved with a faded pine bough pattern. His father had made it during a hard winter, back when time was long and money scarce. Isaiah hadn't touched it in years. Kamara took it without a word. Her fingers ghosted over the whittled grooves, then tightened around the handle. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. That afternoon, the wind changed. It came in low from the east, heavy with the smell of burnt grass. Isaiah set his jaw and scanned the horizon. He caught sight of a thin black line far off, crawling across the prairie like a whisper gone wrong. "Someone's burning fields," he said, more to himself than to her. "That's no ranch fire." Kamara was already standing. Would they come this way? Hard to say. "But I'll ride out, just in case." Nolan looked up from the corner of the barn where he'd been playing with a piece of twine and 2 wooden pegs. "Can I come?" Isaiah shook his head. "Not this time. Stay with your mama. She'll need someone around." Once Isaiah was gone, Kamara took Nolan inside and bolted the door behind them. Her hands trembled around the latch. She didn't speak of it, but she knew what men could do when fire was at their backs. She knew how fast peace could vanish. Near dusk, the door creaked open. Nolan looked up from the floor where he'd fallen asleep against her skirt. Isaiah stepped inside, hat in hand, face dusted with ash. "Fire's not coming this way," he said. "They're clearing brush down near the river." Some fool's idea of early autumn prep. Kamara exhaled, slow and measured. "You weren't gone long. I rode hard. Didn't like leaving you two alone." She nodded, then looked past him to the darkening sky. "I used to think I could manage anything. That if I just kept moving, I'd outrun the worst of it." "You didn't," he said quietly. "You faced it. And you're still here." She looked at him then, really looked at the dirt beneath his nails, the way his shirt had frayed along the collar, the weariness around his eyes that had nothing to do with age. There was something in him she hadn't seen in years. A steadiness that didn't ask for anything in return. "I don't want to keep running," she said. "You don't have to." Isaiah didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. The space between them was already changing slow as a creek cutting stone. Later, after Nolan had been tucked into Isaiah's bed again and the cabin had gone quiet, Kamara stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, caught in the branches of the cottonwoods like a silver snare. Isaiah was sitting on the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees. She sat beside him, the cane resting across her lap. "Your land's quiet," she said. "It's been alone a long time." He didn't turn to look at her, but she could feel the shift in his breathing. "I'm not sure what comes next," she admitted. "I'm not asking for answers," he said. "Just time." Kamara didn't speak, but after a moment her hand moved, brushing against his on the plank between them. She left it there, neither pulled away. A week passed, slow and clean. The high plains softened under late summer heat, and the wind shifted more often, carrying the scent of sage and dust across the hills. Isaiah kept to his chores like always, but now there was the sound of 2 extra sets of footsteps in the grass lighter, uneven ones that didn't belong to any beast or machine. Kamara spent her mornings near the creek that twisted behind the barn, washing Nolan's clothes with a rhythm that steadied her hands. She'd found an old tin basin in the shed and used it like she belonged here, like she hadn't stepped out of ruin just days before. She didn't speak much while she worked, but she didn't avoid his eyes anymore. That afternoon, Isaiah found her in the field behind the barn. She'd pulled the weeds from between the rows of overgrown turnips, sleeves rolled to her elbows, palms stained with earth. Her hair was pinned back, not neatly but with purpose. "You planning to take over the whole place?" Isaiah asked, stopping short of the fence line. "I don't like sitting still," she said, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Besides, I owed your garden some help." He leaned against the fence post. "My mother used to say weeds don't wait for grief to pass." Kamara tilted her head. "She sounds like she didn't put up with much." "She didn't." Kamara crossed to him, fingers trailing over the wire. "What happened to her?" "Fever, 5 winters back. My father went before her. Left me the land and a windmill that barely holds up." She was quiet a moment, then asked, "Did you ever think of leaving?" "I did. Once. Rode as far as Missouri and back before I figured out I wasn't built for towns." "What changed your mind?" Isaiah looked at her, the wind tugging at his sleeves. "I kept dreaming of this place. Woke up thinking about the way the creek sounds after a storm or how the porch groans before sunrise. Started realizing I didn't miss people I missed here." Kamara nodded, gaze drifting toward the horizon. "There's something in the quiet. It puts things in order." Isaiah stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You've been out there long enough. You don't have to keep fighting the wind. I'm not sure I know how to stop. You don't have to yet, but you don't have to do it alone." She looked up at him, eyes steady now. "You really mean to keep us here?" "I don't make offers I don't intend to hold." A long silence stretched between them, full of things not yet spoken. Then she looked past him toward the house. "I was teaching children back in Illinois, before my husband decided the West sounded better. He didn't ask me what I wanted." Isaiah's voice was even. "You teaching Nolan, bits and pieces. He's quick with numbers, but he fights me on letters. Maybe he needs more time. Maybe I do." Later, after supper, Nolan sat on the floor carving a stick into what he claimed was a horse's head. Kamara stood near the window, watching the last light fall across the range. Isaiah poured 2 mugs of coffee, setting one on the table beside her. "You think he's forgotten?" she asked softly. Isaiah followed her gaze to the boy. "Children don't forget, but they carry things different. More honest. I keep waiting for the questions, but he hasn't asked. He will. When he knows you won't fall apart." Kamara sank into the chair. "I don't know if I can answer. You'll try. That's enough." She turned toward him, something unreadable in her expression. "You say things like a man who's lost something himself." Isaiah didn't look away. "I have." Kamara reached for the mug, her fingers brushing his. "You ever speak of it? I might, if you stay." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go of his hand either. The lamp hissed quietly behind them, and outside, the wind moved through the grass like breath. The first frost came early that year. Not hard enough to kill the garden, but enough to silver the porch railings and leave the morning grass brittle underfoot. Isaiah rose before the sun, as he always did, and found Kamara already at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair braided tight against her neck. She stirred cornmeal into a pan with slow, steady motions. Her cane leaned against the cupboard. "You didn't sleep," he said, pulling his coat from the peg beside the door. "I couldn't," she answered. "Nolan's been waking with a cough." Isaiah poured water into a basin and set it near the fire to warm. "He fevered?" "No, just restless." She glanced toward the loft where the boy still slept. "He called out for his father last night." Isaiah nodded once. "Want me to take him riding today?" Kamara wiped her hands on a cloth. "Only if it's no trouble." "I wouldn't have offered if it was." When Nolan woke, Isaiah had the mare bridled and a blanket folded behind the saddle to soften the ride. Kamara watched from the porch, arms crossed against the chill, as they rode out along the shallow ridge where the cottonwoods thinned into open range. She didn't wave. He didn't expect her to. Later, Isaiah brought the boy home with cheeks flushed and pockets full of smooth river stones. Kamara met them at the edge of the barn, brushing straw from her skirt. "Found a badger den," Isaiah said. "Kept our distance. I hope you didn't tell him to poke at it." "No," Nolan said quickly. "He told me to stay quiet so we didn't get bit." Kamara raised an eyebrow. "And did you?" "I did." He looked proud. "Didn't say a word." She reached out and ruffled his hair. "Good." Isaiah stepped back, giving them space. He'd learned early not to press in close when she wasn't ready. That night she came to the porch after Nolan had gone quiet upstairs. Isaiah was at the grindstone, working an edge back into a dull blade. The rasp of steel against stone filled the dark. "I've been thinking," she said. He set the knife aside. "That's usually the start of something. I want to earn my place here. You already have." "Not like that," she said. "I mean real work. Not just sweeping and cooking. I can read and write. I can keep books. If there's a schoolhouse nearby, I could help there. Or I could teach Nolan and the neighbor children if any come around." Isaiah leaned back against the workbench. "There's no schoolhouse in riding distance. Closest one's in Wheatland, and that's too far for a child." "Then I'll teach here." Her voice held no uncertainty. "You said your mother kept ledgers for the ranch. I could do that. Nolan needs more than chores and quiet. He needs structure. So do I." Isaiah looked at her for a long moment. "I'll clear the back room. You can use it for books and lessons." Kamara nodded. "I'd like that." He picked up the whetstone, turning it once in his palm. "You ever think about staying longer than winter?" She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the trees beyond the fence. A barn owl called once from the rafters. "I do think about it," she said at last. "But thinking's not the same as knowing. I'm not in a hurry." She looked at him then, her face bare in the lantern light. "You're patient." "I've learned not to expect things before they are ready." Kamara stepped down from the porch and joined him at the bench. She didn't sit, just stood beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. "I'm not used to being asked what I want," she said. "So what do you want now?" She turned toward him. "To feel like I can breathe without looking over my shoulder. To watch Nolan grow in a place that doesn't take more than it gives. And maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe I want someone who sees me as I am and stays." Isaiah met her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached out then, slow and sure, and rested her hand on his chest, just over his heartbeat. He didn't move, didn't speak. It was the first time she'd leaned into someone without flinching, and he let her stay there as long as she needed. By late October, the wind carried a sharper edge, and the cottonwoods nearest the creek dropped their last leaves in a slow, whispering fall. The days shortened without fanfare, and the first snow came quiet and heavy, blanketing the yard and rooftop in white before dawn. Isaiah shoveled a path to the barn with leather gloves stiff from the cold, his breath rising in clouds. Inside, Kamara had rearranged the back room into a kind of schoolhouse. One oil lamp hung from a hook overhead, and a single shelf built from old fence rails Isaiah had no use for held the few books she'd brought west. She used a flat board propped against the wall for lessons, letters chalked with a steady hand. Nolan sat cross-legged on a wool blanket, tongue between his teeth as he copied shapes into a slate. Isaiah stood in the doorway for a while, not announcing himself. Kamara's voice was calm even, and Nolan responded with a concentration he didn't show for chores. When she caught Isaiah watching, she didn't stop, just nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, then returned her attention to the boy. That evening, Kamara stood at the windowsill, watching the snow fall steady. Isaiah added kindling to the stove, the iron belly glowing red as it swallowed the cold. "School's different without a bell," she said after a long silence. "You want a bell?" he asked. "I want more children to teach." Isaiah glanced toward the loft. "Nolan's not enough, he is," she said softly, "but I've still got more to give." Isaiah leaned against the table, arms crossed. "There's a widow 2 ridges east. Her sister's children came out from Kansas after the mother died, 3 of them, youngest just turned 6. Kamara turned toward him. "Do they get any schooling?" "Not much. The older girl reads some, but they're mostly left to chores and prayer." She stepped closer. "Would you ride out with me? Introduce us. If you're asking, I will." That Sunday they rode out under a white sky. Nolan rode behind Isaiah, arms wrapped tight, and Kamara followed on the gray mare Isaiah had trained the year before. The widow's sod house sat low against the hill, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. The children stood in the doorway as they rode in, faces wary but curious. Introductions were plain. Kamara didn't oversell herself. She offered to teach in the afternoons, 4 days a week. Nothing fancy, just letters, sums, and scripture to start. The widow's nod was slow but certain. On the ride home, Kamara's cheeks were flushed, not from cold but from something deeper. "I didn't realize how much I missed it," she said, eyes on the snowy trail ahead. "Then it's good you're doing it again." She looked over. "You always this agreeable?" Isaiah gave a low chuckle. "Only when I'm sure of the person." They rode the rest of the way without speaking, the snow quiet under the horses' hooves. That winter passed with more warmth than Kamara could have imagined. The cabin filled with the smell of stewed meat and flour biscuits, the creak of Nolan's laughter from the loft, and the scratch of chalk on slate. Isaiah worked the land as always, but now there was another pair of hands beside him when fence posts needed checking or seed stores needed counting. One evening, after Nolan had gone to sleep and the wind howled low outside the windows, Kamara sat near the fire, darning a rip in one of Isaiah's shirts. He sat across from her, booted feet stretched toward the hearth. "I've been thinking," he said. She didn't look up. "That's usually the start of something. I want you to stay, not just through spring." Kamara set the shirt down, her fingers still against the fabric. "You mean that?" "I do." She met his eyes. "You're not asking because you feel sorry for me?" "No," he said. "I'm asking because I've come to know what it feels like to wait for you to walk through a room, to watch you with Nolan, to see your hands in the soil next to mine. I don't want this house without you in it." Kamara crossed the room, slow and sure, and sat beside him on the settle. Her hand found his, rough against hers. "I never thought I'd want to build a life again," she said, "but I want one with you." Isaiah leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Then let's build it together." That spring, with the snow gone and the hills greening, Isaiah and Kamara took vows under the cottonwoods behind the barn. No preacher, just words spoken plain and honest, with Nolan standing between them holding a ring carved from pine. The neighbors came with bread and smoked meat, And the children Kamara taught brought her wildflowers wrapped in twine. Isaiah built her a second shelf for her books, and Kamara stitched his name into the corner of every new quilt she made. Nolan started calling Isaiah Pa without anyone asking him to, and no one corrected him. The days stretched long again. There were still chores, still storms, still fences to mend and illness to tend. But there was also laughter and the soft hum of Kamara's voice as she read aloud in the evenings, and Isaiah's steady warmth beside her in bed when the wind returned. They didn't speak of the past much. It had shaped them, but it didn't own them. What mattered now was the life they forged, quiet, honest, and full of hard-earned love. And they lived it every day, side by side.